The coffee pot trembled in Maya's hand as she watched the elderly man fumble through his worn leather wallet for the third time. His fingers, gnarled and spotted with age, moved with the desperate precision of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for but couldn't find it. The fluorescent lights of Rosie's diner buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the red vinyl booth where he sat, and Maya could see the thin sheen of perspiration forming on his weathered forehead, despite the aggressive air conditioning that made the waitresses wear cardigans even in July. It was 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday, that dead zone between lunch rush and dinner prep, when the diner fell into an exhausted silence broken only by the clatter of dishes being washed in the back and the occasional hiss of the industrial dishwasher. Maya had been on her feet since 5 that morning, pulling a double shift because rent was due in 3 days and she was still $200 short. Her lower back ached with that deep, persistent throb that no amount of stretching could cure, and there was a blister forming on her right heel where her second-hand work shoes had finally given up any pretense of comfort. The old man, she'd heard him introduce himself as Henry to the hostess, had ordered the senior special, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, bacon, and coffee. Black, no sugar. The bill came to $8.47 with tax. He'd eaten slowly, methodically, cutting his eggs into perfect squares and dabbing each piece with a paper napkin before taking a bite, and Maya had refilled his coffee 3 times without him asking. There was something about the careful way he moved, the quiet dignity in how he sat with his shoulders squared despite their obvious fragility, that reminded her of her own grandfather before the Alzheimer's had stolen him away piece by piece. Now Henry was staring at the contents of his wallet with an expression Maya had seen too many times before, that particular shade of panic mixed with shame that came when dignity collided with mathematics. She counted 4 singles, a library card so faded the name was barely legible, what looked like an old photograph worn soft at the edges, and a slip of paper with phone numbers written in shaky handwriting. No credit cards. No debit cards. No crisp 20s tucked behind the singles as a safety net. "Everything all right, sir?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd been waitressing at Rosie's for 3 years, ever since she dropped out of community college when her mother got sick, and she developed a sixth sense for these moments. The diner attracted a particular clientele in this part of Portland, working-class families stretching paychecks, elderly folks on fixed incomes, construction workers grabbing quick meals between jobs. Rosie's wasn't the kind of place where people ordered appetizers and dessert. It was the kind of place where people calculated tips to the penny and sometimes asked for water instead of soda to save $1.50. Henry looked up at her, and Maya saw something flicker in his pale blue eyes. Not quite embarrassment, but a sort of weary resignation, as if this wasn't the first time he'd found himself in this position and wouldn't be the last. "I seem to have miscalculated," he said softly, his voice carrying the remnants of what might have once been a refined accent, though years had worn it down to something harder to place. "I thought I had enough, but I'm short about $4. The diner had a policy about unpaid bills. Maya had seen it enforced exactly twice in her time there. Once when a teenager tried to dine and dash, Marcus, the cook, had chased him down the block, and once when a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a wedding ring had genuinely forgotten his wallet and returned 20 minutes later with cash and a $5 tip as an apology. The official protocol was to inform Rick, the manager, who would then make a show of calling the police while usually just comping the meal and making the customer feel terrible enough that they'd never try it again. If you're enjoying this story of unexpected kindness, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more heartwarming true stories. But Rick wasn't here. He'd left at 2 o'clock for a dentist appointment, leaving Maya in charge with strict instructions to keep everything running smooth and to not give away free food to every sob story that walks in. Rick was a decent enough boss. He let her pick up extra shifts and didn't comment when she occasionally took home slightly stale pastries at closing time. But he ran the diner with the perpetual anxiety of someone whose profit margins lived in the razor-thin space between black ink and red. Maya glanced toward the kitchen window where she could see Marcus prepping vegetables for the evening rush, his massive frame bent over a cutting board, completely absorbed in turning carrots into perfect julienne strips. Through the front window, she could see the parking lot baking under the afternoon sun, heat waves rising off the asphalt in shimmering curtains. A delivery truck rumbled past on Highway 26, the sound briefly drowning out the oldies station playing softly from the radio behind the counter. "Don't worry about it," Maya heard herself say, the words coming out before her brain had fully authorized them. She pulled her order pad from her apron pocket, flipped to a blank page, and made a show of recalculating. "Actually, I think I rang this up wrong. The senior special is supposed to be $6 on Thursdays. My mistake." She smiled at him, trying to make it look natural, trying to make it seem like this was a genuine error and not charity wearing a flimsy disguise. Henry studied her face for a long moment, and Maya had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her improvised fiction. His eyes, though rheumy with age, held a sharpness that belied his trembling hands and stooped posture. "Young lady," he said quietly, "I've been coming to diners since before you were born, and I know what the senior special costs. You don't need to do this." "I made a mistake," Maya insisted, keeping her voice light and professional. "Happens all the time. $4 back to you, and we'll call it even." She pulled a 5 from her own apron pocket, tips from the morning shift, and tucked it into his weathered hand before he could protest further. "Consider the extra 53 cents a tip for having to deal with my math skills." For a moment she thought he might argue. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again as he seemed to wage some internal battle between pride and pragmatism. Finally, he nodded slowly, folding the $5 bill with meticulous care and placing it in his wallet alongside the other singles. "You're very kind," he said, and there was something in his voice, a weight, a history, a lifetime of stories compressed into 3 simple words. "May I ask your name?" "Maya. Maya Rodriguez." "Maya." He repeated it as if committing it to memory, giving each syllable its full weight. "That's a beautiful name. Do you know what it means?" She shook her head, suddenly aware of how close she was standing to his booth, how the diner's air conditioning was making goosebumps rise on her arms beneath her thin uniform. "In Sanskrit, it means illusion, the veil that covers reality." Henry's smile was slight but genuine, creating new topography in the landscape of wrinkles that mapped his face. "Though in Hebrew it means water or spring, a source of life." He gestured to the coffee pot still in her hand. "Seems fitting for someone who ensures the coffee never runs dry." Maya laughed despite herself, a real laugh that surprised her with its sudden appearance. "I never knew that. My mom just liked how it sounded." The mention of her mother brought the familiar tight feeling to her chest, but she pushed it away, the same way she'd been pushing away thoughts of medical bills and hospice care coordinators and the impossible mathematics of dying in America. Henry slid out of the booth with careful deliberation, using the table edge for support as he got his feet under him. He was tall, or had been tall once, before time had compressed his spine and bent his shoulders forward. He wore tan slacks that had been hemmed inexpertly, probably by his own hand, and a blue cardigan with leather patches on the elbows that had seen better decades. Everything about him spoke of someone who had once cared deeply about appearance and was now making do with whatever remained. "Thank you, Maya Rodriguez," he said, extending his hand. His grip, when she shook it, was surprisingly firm despite the tremor, and his skin felt like paper that had been folded and unfolded too many times. "You've done more than help with a bill today. You've reminded an old man that kindness hasn't gone extinct." "It's really no trouble," Maya said, suddenly embarrassed by the gravity he was assigning to what had been a $5 gesture. She'd given away more than that in free coffee refills and, accidentally, oversized portions to construction workers who looked like they were running on empty. This was just how you survived, by looking out for each other in the small ways you could. Henry released her hand but continued to hold her gaze. "My wife used to say that small kindnesses are never small to the person receiving them." She was right about most things. The past tense sat heavy in the air between them. "I wonder if I might ask you something, Maya. Do you believe in fate? In divine appointments?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected him to shuffle toward the door, maybe leave a comment card on his way out, disappear back into whatever life he'd emerged from. Instead, he stood there with an intensity that seemed at odds with his frail appearance, waiting for her answer as if it mattered. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I used to think I did, but lately," She trailed off, unsure how to explain the complicated relationship she developed with the universe over the past 2 years. How do you believe in fate when your mother gets diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer at 53? When your boyfriend leaves because he can't handle the stress? When your college fund becomes a medical fund becomes a funeral fund? Lately, I think we just do the best we can with what we're given. Henry nodded as if she'd confirmed something he already suspected. Wisdom beyond your years. He pulled a business card from his wallet. Not his own card, she noticed, but a card he'd written on the back of, the front bearing the logo of some medical supply company. His handwriting on the back was shaky but legible. A phone number, nothing else. I'd like to invite you to coffee sometime. Somewhere I can actually pay. The gentle humor in his voice took any awkwardness out of the invitation. I have a feeling we have more to discuss, you and I. Maya took the card, more out of politeness than any real intention to call. Elderly men asked her for her number semi-regularly, usually lonely widowers who mistook professional friendliness for genuine interest, and she developed a practiced way of accepting contact information she had no intention of using. But there was something different about Henry. He wasn't looking at her the way those other men did, with hunger or loneliness or the desperate hope that a young woman might fill the void left by a dead wife. He was looking at her with recognition, curiosity. She couldn't quite name it. Sure, she said, slipping the card into her apron pocket alongside her order pad and the assorted detritus of her shift. Sugar packets, a pen she'd stolen from the bank, a hair tie. I'd like that. Henry smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes, transforming his face from merely old to timelessly distinguished. Wonderful. I mean that, Maya. Wonderful. He made his way toward the door with the careful steps of someone whose body had become an unreliable vehicle, one hand trailing along the counter for balance. Just before pushing through the glass door with its cheerful open 24 hours decal, he turned back. Your mother would be very proud of you, you know? The woman who gave you that beautiful name. The words hit Maya like a physical force, and she had to grip the back of the nearest booth to steady herself. How could he know? She hadn't mentioned her mother beyond that one passing comment. Hadn't said anything about sickness or hospitals or the way the hospice room smelled like artificial lavender and approaching death. And yet he'd spoken with such certainty, such specific knowledge, that for a dizzy moment she wondered if he really could see through the veil of reality, if maybe he knew things that shouldn't be knowable. But by the time she'd recovered enough to respond, Henry was already gone, just a silhouette disappearing into the bright afternoon, leaving behind only an empty coffee cup, a spotlessly clean table, and $8 in cash tucked under the salt shaker. The exact amount of his original bill, which meant he'd somehow paid anyway despite her attempted generosity. Maya stood there for a long moment, staring at the money, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The whole interaction had lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like something had shifted, like the ordinary afternoon had developed a crack and something stranger had leaked through. She pocketed the $8. It would go back into the register. She wasn't a thief and cleared his table, wiping down the already clean surface with a damp cloth that smelled of bleach and the particular nowhere scent of industrial cleaner. Who was that? Destiny, the other waitress on shift, materialized beside her with the sudden appearance of someone who'd been watching from the back room. Destiny was 19, studying cosmetology at the community college, and possessed the kind of effortless beauty that made her tip jar consistently fuller than Maya's despite providing objectively worse service. She also had an insatiable curiosity about everything and everyone, which made her exhausting to work with but never boring. Just an old man, Maya said, spraying the table again even though it didn't need it. Forgot his wallet. Aha! And that whole thing where you gave him money from your own pocket. Destiny raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a skill Maya had tried and failed to master. Rick's gonna be pissed if he finds out. Rick's not going to find out. Maya gave her a meaningful look. Right? Destiny held up her hands in mock surrender, her acrylic nails, currently painted a sparkly purple that matched her eyeshadow, catching the light. Your secret's safe with me, girl. But seriously, you gotta stop doing that. You can't save everybody. The words stung because they were true. Maya had been trying to save people for 2 years now, and all she had to show for it was an empty bank account, crushing debt, and a mother who was dying anyway despite everything. The experimental treatments, the special organic diet, the supplements that cost more than rent, the positive thinking and prayer chains and desperate middle-of-the-night bargaining with a God she wasn't sure she believed in. You can't save everybody. You couldn't even save the one person who mattered most. I know, Maya said quietly, and she did know, but knowing didn't stop her from trying. The dinner rush started at 5, and Maya pushed all thoughts of Henry and mysterious business cards and impossible knowledge about her mother to the back of her mind. Rosie's filled up with the usual Thursday crowd. The Thompson family with their 4 noisy kids who always ordered pancakes for dinner, Luis and his construction crew still covered in drywall dust, the nurses from Providence Hospital still in their scrubs and looking like they needed the coffee more than food, Mrs. Chun who came in 3 times a week and always sat at the counter and always ordered the Chinese chicken salad with an irony she clearly appreciated. Maya moved through the familiar choreography of service, taking orders, delivering food, refilling drinks, clearing plates, navigating the narrow spaces between booths with the muscle memory of someone who could do this job in their sleep and sometimes felt like they were. Her feet ached. Her back ached. That blister had definitely popped, and she could feel something wet and painful inside her shoe. But she smiled and laughed with customers, teased Marcus about his new tattoo, a dragon that looked suspiciously like it had been copied from a fantasy novel cover, split a piece of apple pie with Destiny during a brief lull around 7:30. This was her life now. Not glamorous. Not what she'd imagined when she was 17 and filling out college applications with the fierce certainty that she was destined for something bigger than a small Oregon town and a waitressing uniform. But it was honest work, and there was dignity in that, and some nights, not tonight but some nights, she could almost convince herself that this was enough. It wasn't until she was closing out the register at 11:30, her eyes burning with exhaustion and her tip jar heavier than expected, the nurses had been generous, that she remembered the business card. She pulled it out of her apron pocket, now slightly crumpled and stained with what looked like ketchup on one corner. The phone number stared back at her. 7 digits that could mean nothing or everything. An invitation to a coffee date with an old man who'd known things he shouldn't have known and looked at her like she was someone worth remembering. Maya took out her phone. An iPhone 6 with a cracked screen she'd been meaning to replace for 8 months, and started to add the number to her contacts. Then she stopped. What would she even save it under? Henry from Diner? Old man who forgot his wallet? Mysterious stranger who might be psychic or might just be lucky at guessing? In the end, she saved it as H Coffee and tucked both the card and her phone back into her purse. She probably wouldn't call. She never called these numbers. She'd collect her paycheck tomorrow, pay what she could toward rent, visit her mother at the hospice on Saturday morning like she did every Saturday morning, and keep swimming through the days that all blurred together into one long exercise in survival. But as she locked the diner's front door and walked to her car, a 2004 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and an inspection sticker that had expired 2 months ago, Maya caught herself thinking about Henry's question. Do you believe in fate? In divine appointments? And she thought about the timing, how if he'd come in 20 minutes earlier Rick would have still been there, how if she'd been serving any other table she might not have seen him struggling with his wallet, how the universe or chaos or whatever ran this simulation had arranged things exactly so their paths would cross at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday in July. The Portland night was warm and thick, the air tasting of car exhaust and the distant promise of the ocean, though they were too far inland to actually smell it. Maya sat in her car for a moment before starting the engine, letting the stillness wash over her. Somewhere in the city, Henry was probably in bed, hopefully safe, hopefully not hungry. Somewhere in a hospice room that cost $200 a day, her mother was probably sleeping, hopefully dreaming of better things than the cancer eating her from the inside out. And here was Maya, caught between them, between the old man she'd helped for reasons she couldn't quite articulate and the old woman she couldn't help no matter how hard she tried. 23 years old and so tired she sometimes forgot what it felt like to not be tired. But still here, still showing up, still trying to believe that small kindnesses mattered even when everything else was falling apart. She pulled the business card out one more time, studying it in the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. Just a phone number, nothing more. But maybe, and she knew this was foolish, knew she was assigning meaning where only coincidence existed. Maybe it was something like a lifeline tossed by a universe that occasionally remembered she was drowning. Maya started her car, the engine making a concerning clicking sound that she added to the growing list of things she needed to fix but couldn't afford to fix, and drove home through streets that were just beginning to empty of people. Tomorrow she'd wake up at 4:30 and do it all again. And the day after that. And the day after that. This was life in the margins, life in the spaces between paychecks, life measured in cups of coffee and $8 bills and the small victories of making it through another shift without breaking down. But tonight, for reasons she would spend the next week trying to understand, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not quite hope. Hope was too strong a word, too fragile a thing to risk nurturing. But maybe its distant cousin. Maybe a possibility. Maybe the sense that she'd stood at a crossroads without realizing it and had chosen, however unconsciously, a path that led somewhere different than where she'd been going. The business card sat on her passenger seat the whole drive home, and when she finally crawled into bed at 12:45 a.m., she put it on her nightstand next to the photo of her mother from before the cancer, before the fear, back when they were just two women who looked alike and laughed at the same jokes and believed the future was a gift they'd have time to unwrap slowly. Maya closed her eyes and thought of Henry's smile, the way he'd held her hand with such intentional gentleness, the impossible thing he'd said about her mother being proud. And just before sleep claimed her, she made a decision that she would later recognize as the moment everything changed. She would call that number. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Because if fate existed, if divine appointments were real, then maybe, just maybe, she'd been meant to help that old man for reasons that had nothing to do with $8.47 and everything to do with what came next. Maya's alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. with the aggressive cheerfulness of a device that had no concept of human suffering. She slapped at her phone until the noise stopped, then lay in the darkness for exactly 90 seconds. Not sleeping, just existing in that liminal space between unconsciousness and the demands of the day. This was her routine. This had been her routine for 3 years. Wake up, briefly consider whether she could get away with calling in sick. She couldn't. She needed every shift. Force herself upright, stumble to the shower, and let the hot water pretend to wash away the accumulated exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. Her apartment was small, a studio in a complex that optimistically called itself Victory Gardens, despite having no garden and being located next to a car wash that started operations at 6 a.m. for 150 square feet that contained her entire life. A Murphy bed that didn't fold up properly anymore, so she'd stopped trying. A kitchenette with 2 working burners out of 4. A bathroom where the toilet ran unless you jiggled the handle, and a window that looked out onto a dumpster enclosure decorated with ambitious graffiti. The walls were thin enough that she knew her neighbor Derek's work schedule, overnight security guard. His taste in music, surprisingly, classic country. And the fact that his girlfriend had left him 3 weeks ago. She'd heard the argument through the wall, every word crystal clear. But it was hers. Mostly. She rented it for $850 a month, which in Portland was actually a decent deal, though that fact gave her no comfort when rent was due. The math that governed her life was brutal and unforgiving. $1,800 a month from Rosie's if she worked full-time and didn't miss any shifts, minus $850 for rent, minus $120 for her car payment, 3 years left on a loan for a used car that was already falling apart, minus $200 for insurance and gas, minus $150 minimum for food, minus $80 for her phone, minus $40 for utilities, leaving her with roughly $360 for everything else. Everything else included student loans she'd stopped paying and was ignoring the threatening letters about credit card debt that had ballooned from $2,000 to $7,500 in the past 18 months, and the impossible expenses of her mother's illness, the co-pays the medications insurance didn't cover, the supplements the naturopath had insisted would help, the organic groceries, the therapeutic massage, the distance healing, the everything that ultimately did nothing but postpone the inevitable while draining every penny Maya could beg, borrow, or steal. She'd tried for a second job. 3 months ago, she'd worked at a Starbucks from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. after her diner shifts, but her body had staged a rebellion after 6 weeks. Stomach ulcers, stress-induced eczema that made her hands crack and bleed, fainting spells that scared her badly enough that she'd finally quit. You couldn't serve coffee if you couldn't stay conscious. The math didn't work. It would never work, but she kept trying to make it work anyway because the alternative was giving up. And Maya Rodriguez had learned from her mother that you didn't give up even when giving up was the only sensible option remaining. The shower was lukewarm. The building's water heater was temperamental at best. And Maya washed her hair with the cheap shampoo that made it frizzy but cost $3 instead of $12. She'd learned to be economical about everything. One razor blade lasted 6 weeks if you were careful. Makeup was optional. Nobody at the diner cared if she wore mascara. She cut her own hair in the bathroom mirror, straight across the back, shaggy around the face. Good enough. Her uniform was the same one she'd worn yesterday, hung up to air out because she only owned 2 and couldn't afford to run the laundry in the building's coin-operated machines every day. Blue polyester dress, white apron, white sneakers that had once been white and were now a grayish color that no amount of scrubbing could fix. She was out the door by 5:15, stopping at the 7-Eleven on the corner, where Hamid worked the early shift. "Morning, Maya." He greeted her with the warmth of someone who'd also immigrated to America chasing a dream and found something more complicated than expected. "The usual? Please." The usual was a large coffee, $2, and she drank it black because cream and sugar cost extra, and a banana that was usually more brown than yellow but provided necessary calories at 79 cents. Sometimes she splurged on a breakfast burrito from the hot case, but not today. Today she was being good, being disciplined, trying to convince herself that if she just saved a little more, if she just worked a little harder, if she just wanted it badly enough, the numbers would eventually work out. "How's your mother?" Hamid asked as he rang up her purchase, and Maya appreciated that he asked every time, that he remembered, that he treated her like a person instead of just another transaction. "She's okay," Maya said, which was the lie she told everyone except herself. Her mother was dying, had been dying for 2 years, was actively in the process of dying right now. But people didn't want to hear that. They wanted to hear "okay" or "hanging in there" or "fighting hard." Platitudes that let everyone pretend that cancer was something you could beat through positive thinking and determination instead of what it actually was. A collection of cells that didn't care about your attitude or your goodness or how many people loved you. The drive to Rosie's took 12 minutes, and Maya spent them listening to a true crime podcast. Not because she particularly cared about unsolved murders, but because focusing on other people's tragedies made her own feel slightly more manageable. The diner was already lit up when she arrived, the neon sign buzzing its pink greeting into the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus's truck was in the parking lot. He started even earlier than she did, prepping the kitchen, getting the griddle hot, making the gravy that somehow tasted better than it had any right to given that it came from a powder mix and reconstituted sausage. "Morning," Marcus called when she came through the back door. He was standing at his station, a mountain of a man with tattooed forearms and hands that could palm a basketball, moving with the surprising grace of someone who'd found his calling in a diner kitchen. Marcus had worked at Rosie's for 7 years, since he'd gotten out of prison, armed robbery. He'd told her once, from when he was young and stupid and didn't know there were better ways to be poor. Now he made $11 an hour, lived in a halfway house, and sent money back to his mom in Sacramento every month. Maya liked him because he never asked questions beyond "you doing okay?" and accepted whatever answer she gave without pushing. "Morning," she echoed, tying on her apron and going through her opening routine. Start coffee brewing, check salt and pepper shakers, restock napkins, make sure the ketchup bottles were full, wipe down menus, turn on the lights in the dining room, flip the sign to open. By 5:45, the first customers were trickling in, usually the same faces, people whose internal clocks had them awake before sunrise. Gerald, who drove a truck for UPS and always ordered the same thing: 3 eggs scrambled, bacon crispy, white toast, orange juice. Rosa and Linda, nurses finishing the night shift at Providence, sharing a booth and picking at a pile of pancakes they were too tired to really eat. Tom, who might or might not be homeless. Maya had never asked, who nursed a single cup of coffee for 2 hours and left exactly $1 on the table. This was Maya's world. These people, this place, these rituals that shaped her days into something recognizable. She knew their orders, their habits, their small stories. She knew that Gerald's daughter was graduating high school this year, and he was proud but also sad because it meant she'd be leaving for college. She knew that Rosa was getting divorced after 23 years of marriage and pretending it didn't hurt. She knew that Tom had a dog named Biscuit and kept a picture of him in his pocket, and sometimes he showed it to Maya and his whole face softened into something that looked like love. She moved through the morning shift on autopilot, her body executing tasks while her mind drifted elsewhere. She thought about Henry, kept thinking about him even though she'd told herself not to. There was something about their interaction that wouldn't leave her alone, like a stone in her shoe or a song stuck in her head. The way he'd looked at her, the things he'd said, that business card sitting on her nightstand at home. She'd Googled the number last night before bed. Not calling it, just typing it into the search bar to see what came up. Nothing. No business listing, no social media profile, no digital footprint at all, which seemed impossible in 2024 when even her dead grandmother had a Facebook page people still posted birthday wishes on. Earth to Maya. Destiny snapped her fingers in front of Maya's face, and she realized she'd been standing at table 7 with a coffee pot in hand, staring into middle distance. You okay? You've been weird all morning. Fine, Maya said automatically. Just tired. Girl, you're always tired. Destiny took the coffee pot from her hands and nodded toward the back. Take your break. I've got this. Maya's break was technically 15 minutes, but she usually stretched it to 20, going out the back door to sit on the concrete steps by the dumpster where the smell of old grease fought with her 7-Eleven banana for dominance. She pulled out her phone, intending to scroll through social media in the mindless way she usually did, but instead found herself opening her contacts and looking at H. Coffee. She could call him, right now. Ask about that coffee he'd mentioned. Find out who he was, why he'd seemed so interested in her. Whether she'd been reading something into a simple interaction that had been perfectly ordinary. Her thumb hovered over the number. She didn't call. Instead, she called the hospice, like she did every day during her break, and asked to speak to her mother. The receptionist, Karen, who'd been nothing but kind during these impossible months, put her through to her mother's room, and after a moment, a thin voice came on the line. Maya. Hi, Mom. Maya tried to inject energy into her voice, tried to sound like someone who wasn't sitting by a dumpster at 6:30 in the morning after working for an hour and facing 9 more hours before she could go home. How are you feeling today? Oh, you know. Her mother's laugh was weak but genuine. Living the dream. They had Jell-O for dessert yesterday. Green. You know how I love green Jell-O. This was their routine too, this performance they put on for each other. Her mother pretended the hospice was a hotel, that she'd chosen to be there, that green Jell-O was the height of luxury. Maya pretended to believe her. They both knew they were pretending, but the alternative, acknowledging the truth of what was happening, felt too heavy to carry in a 15-minute phone call. Listen, baby, her mother said, and Maya heard the shift in her voice, the way it dropped into seriousness. I need you to promise me something. Mom, don't. Promise me you'll live your life. After. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them wanted to speak. You're 23 years old. You should be out there having adventures, making mistakes, falling in love, not working yourself to death at a diner. I'm not. Promise me, Maya Elena Rodriguez. The full name, the tone that brooked no argument. The mother voice that could still command obedience even when the woman wielding it weighed barely 90 pounds and couldn't walk to the bathroom without assistance. Promise me you won't spend your life just surviving. That's not living. Maya closed her eyes and saw her mother as she'd been 5 years ago. 50 pounds heavier, hair dark and thick instead of gone from chemo, standing in their old kitchen making tamales for Christmas, flour dusting her arms, laughing at something Maya's father had said before he'd left them. That was a different kind of death, slower but just as final. That woman had believed in possibility. That woman had worked 2 jobs to send Maya to college, had believed education was the ladder you climbed to reach better things. I promise, Maya lied, because sometimes lying was kinder than truth. They talked for a few more minutes about nothing. The weather, a nurse her mother particularly liked, a cat that had somehow gotten into the hospice common room and caused general delight, and then her mother was tired, her voice fading, and they said goodbye with all the casual ease of people who believe they'd talk again tomorrow. This story gets even more powerful from here. If it's touching your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Maya sat on those concrete steps for 5 more minutes after the call ended. letting the morning air dry the tears she refused to acknowledge were falling. Then she stood, wiped her face, and went back inside to finish her shift. Because this was what you did. You kept going. You showed up. You smiled at customers and refilled coffee and pretended that everything was fine, even when fine was so far from accurate it might as well have been a different language. The lunch rush hit at 11:30, and Maya didn't have time to think about anything beyond the immediate demands of her section. 12 tables, all full, orders flying, Marcus calling out, "Order up!" every 90 seconds, the printer spitting tickets in an endless stream, the controlled chaos that made the hours pass faster than the slow morning shift. She delivered burgers and salads and soup of the day, chicken noodle, always chicken noodle on Fridays. She split a milkshake into 2 cups for the Walker twins without being asked because she knew they'd share anyway. She gave Arnold extra crackers with his chili because he liked to crumble them up. Maya stared at the business card for 3 days before she called. Each morning she'd pick it up from her nightstand, turn it over in her hands, put it back down. On Saturday, after visiting her mother, who'd fallen asleep mid-sentence, the morphine pulling her under, Maya sat in her car in the hospice parking lot and finally dialed the number. It rang once. "Maya," Henry answered, as if he'd been waiting. "I wondered if you'd call." They met at a coffee shop downtown, the kind with exposed brick and baristas who took their foam art seriously. Henry was already there when she arrived, sitting by the window in a pressed shirt and the same cardigan with elbow patches. He stood when he saw her, that careful unfolding of old bones, and smiled like they were old friends reuniting. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. There were 2 cups already on the table. "I took the liberty. Black coffee, no sugar." I remembered. Maya sat, wrapping her hands around the warm cup, suddenly nervous. "You said you wanted to talk." "I did. I do." Henry leaned forward, his pale blue eyes sharp despite their roomy edges. "Maya, I'm going to tell you something that will sound impossible. I'd ask that you hear me out before you decide I'm senile." She nodded, though her instinct was already preparing to bolt. "I'm dying," he said simply. "Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave me 3 months. That was 2 months ago." He held up a hand before she could offer the condolences forming on her lips. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I have something I need to do before I go. And I believe, you're meant to help me do it." Maya's throat tightened. "Pancreatic cancer? Like your mother." "I know. That's not coincidence, or rather, I don't believe in coincidence anymore." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, thick and official looking. "I have money, Maya. Quite a lot of it, actually. I made some smart investments in the 70s, got lucky with tech stocks in the 90s. I never had children. My wife passed 8 years ago. I have no family left." He slid the envelope across the table. Maya didn't touch it. "I've spent the last month looking for someone," Henry continued. "Someone kind. Someone who helps without expecting anything in return. Someone who understands what it means to watch someone you love die slowly while the medical system bleeds you dry." His voice cracked slightly. "Someone who uses their own tip money to cover a stranger's breakfast." "You paid anyway," Maya whispered. "You left $8. "I did. I wanted to see if you'd pocket it or put it in the register." "You put it in the register." He smiled. "You were the 7th person I tested that week. The others all kept it. You didn't." Maya finally reached for the envelope, her hands shaking. Inside was a cashier's check. She looked at the number, blinked, looked again. $250,000. Made out to Maya Elena Rodriguez. "I don't understand." "I'm leaving you my estate," Henry said. "All of it. This is just the beginning. There's more, much more. But this is immediate. Liquid. I need you to take it." "I can't." "You can. You will." His voice was firm now, commanding. "Do you know what I did before I retired, Maya? I was a social worker. 40 years helping people navigate systems designed to crush them. I watched good people destroyed by medical debt, by poverty that wasn't their fault, by a society that punishes kindness." He reached across and covered her hand with his papery one. I can't fix the system, but I can help one person. I can help you save your mother. Or at least give her comfort in whatever time she has left. I can give you a chance to live instead of just survive. Maya's vision blurred with tears. Why me? Because you gave me $5 when you couldn't afford it. Because you lied to protect my dignity. Because when I mentioned your mother, you didn't ask how I knew. You just accepted it, the way people who are too tired to question magic accept miracles. Henry squeezed her hand gently. Because I see myself in you. The same stubborn refusal to give up. The same belief that small kindnesses matter. I promised her, Maya said, her voice breaking. I promised I'd live my life after. But I don't know how to do that when she's dying because I can't afford to save her. Then start now. Take this gift because that's what it is, Maya, a gift, and use it. Pay for the treatments. Hire the specialists. Move her to a better facility. Or don't. Maybe it's too late for that. But you can make her comfortable. You can spend time with her instead of working double shifts. You can hold her hand and tell her stories and be there when... He stopped, steadied himself. You can be there. Isn't that worth everything? Maya looked at the check, at this impossible number that could erase her debt, save her mother, give her back the future she'd surrendered. She looked at Henry, this stranger who wasn't a stranger, who'd orchestrated their meeting with the careful precision of someone who'd run out of time for accidents. What do you want in return? Coffee, Henry said. Once a week until I can't anymore. I'd like to spend my last few weeks with someone who reminds me why I believed in people. And when I'm gone, his voice softened. I'd like you to do something kind for a stranger. Somewhere, sometime. Pass it forward. That's all. Maya thought of her mother's voice on the phone, weak but insistent. Promise me you'll live your life. She thought of the exhaustion that had become her default state, the mathematics of poverty that never worked, the slow drowning she'd accepted as normal. She thought of Henry's wife who'd believed small kindnesses were never small to the person receiving them. She folded her hands around the check, protecting it like the fragile, impossible thing it was. Okay, she whispered. Okay. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us share more stories about the power of human kindness. Henry's smile transformed his face, years falling away. Wonderful, he said. That's wonderful. They drank their coffee. Maya called the hospice. And for the first time in 2 years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe occasionally remembered to be kind.